The night Karen tried to shut down my party was the night everything changed. Because when someone tells you to turn the music off, sends threats through official channels, and assumes you'll quietly comply, they never expect you to smile and think bigger. It started with a simple backyard celebration. A few friends, lights strung between trees, food on the grill, and laughter carrying just far enough to remind the neighborhood that people still lived here. That's when the message arrived. HOA violation. Excessive noise. Immediate shutdown required. I hadn't even turned the speakers up yet. Karen didn't come alone. She arrived with authority in her posture and rules memorized like scripture, explaining how my party endangered community standards. She spoke calmly, but her eyes searched for control. I nodded, thanked her for the reminder, and told my guests to pause the music. Everyone thought it was over. That was her mistake. Because that night, instead of going inside angry, I went inside curious. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, city ordinances, and public event regulations, reading every line like a map. What I found wasn't a restriction. It was a loophole so wide it felt intentional. The rules only governed private residential property. They had no authority beyond it. And that's when the idea hit me so hard I laughed out loud. If my party couldn't happen at home, it didn't have to be home at all. The next morning, while Karen was probably congratulating herself, I was making phone calls. Venues, event spaces. Then one number led to another, and suddenly I was speaking to a stadium events coordinator who asked how many people I expected. I told him I'd let him know. Word spread fast. Friends invited friends. Then strangers asked how they could come. By the end of the week, my canceled backyard party had evolved into something nobody could shut down. Permits approved. Security booked. Music scheduled. Karen's clipboard never stood a chance. The party she tried to silence was about to echo louder than anything our street had ever heard. And this time, every rule was on my side. By the time the contracts were signed, the reality finally set in. This wasn't a joke anymore. The stadium wasn't some tiny local field either. It was a real venue with lights tall enough to cast shadows over entire blocks and seats that curved endlessly around the field. When I walked through it for the first time, empty and silent, I imagined the sound of people filling it. Music bouncing off concrete. Energy rising where nothing had existed before. All because one woman decided a backyard party was too much freedom. Planning moved fast, faster than Karen ever expected. Permits were approved through the city because everything was transparent and compliant. Noise ordinances were addressed. Security teams were booked. Food trucks signed on immediately, thrilled by the crowd estimates. DJs jumped at the chance to perform somewhere unusual. What started as frustration transformed into coordination, and that coordination brought excitement. Every email confirmation felt like another door closing behind Karen's authority. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, confusion spread. Neighbors whispered about flyers circulating online, a public event, a massive one. People asked questions in group chats. Someone finally mentioned my name. That's when Karen noticed. She knocked on my door again, clipboard clutched like a shield, asking what I thought I was doing. I told her, calmly, that the party had been moved. She smiled, thinking she'd won. Then I added where. The smile vanished. Her silence was loud. She tried escalating. Emergency HOA meetings, phone calls, emails marked urgent. But each attempt collapsed under one simple truth. The HOA had no jurisdiction. She wasn't losing control slowly. She lost it instantly. Watching someone realize their power has limits is a strange thing. It looks like confusion first, then panic, then anger. I saw all three in rapid succession. As the event date approached, momentum became unstoppable. The RSVP list exploded. Local vendors promoted it. People who had never met me shared the event just because they loved the story. It wasn't rebellion anymore. It was community. Not forced, not regulated, but chosen. And that scared Karen more than any noise ever could. Because once people experience freedom without consequence, they remember it. The night before the event, I drove past my quiet street. Porch lights glowed. Lawns sat perfectly trimmed. Everything looked exactly the way Karen wanted it. Controlled, silent, orderly. Then I drove to the stadium, where crews were setting up stages and testing lights. Tomorrow, thousands of voices would replace silence. And no clipboard in the world could stop it. The day of the event arrived with a kind of calm that only comes before something massive. While the neighborhood woke up to its usual routines, I woke up to notifications. Messages from vendors confirming arrival times, performers checking in, volunteers asking where to report. The stadium doors opened early, and suddenly the empty space from my first visit was alive. Cables ran across the ground. Speakers were stacked high. Lights flickered on one by one, testing the sky. By mid-afternoon, people started showing up, not in trickles but waves. Families, groups of friends, couples who had driven in from other towns after hearing the story online. Some wore homemade shirts. Some carried signs. Most just carried curiosity. They weren't there to defy anyone. They were there to celebrate being part of something unexpected. That's when I realized this had grown far beyond a party. It had become a statement. Music started before sunset. The first beat rolled through the stadium and echoed outward, clean and controlled, exactly within the permitted limits. Security nodded. City officials observed and smiled. Everything was compliant. Everything was approved. The irony was almost poetic. The sound that had been too much for a backyard now filled a space designed to hold it. And instead of complaints, it drew cheers. Back in the neighborhood, Karen couldn't ignore it anymore. Photos flooded social media. Someone tagged the HOA page by accident. Others did it on purpose. The comments were brutal but honest. People weren't angry. They were amused. They asked why something so harmless had been pushed this far. They questioned rules they'd never questioned before. And once people start asking questions, answers are never enough. As night fell, the stadium lights came on fully. Thousands of people moved together, laughing, dancing, sharing food, talking to strangers like they'd known each other for years. I stood at the edge for a moment, taking it all in. This was the same energy Karen tried to shut down. The same joy she labeled disruptive. Seeing it multiplied like this felt surreal. Later, someone showed me a photo. Karen, standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching from a distance. No clipboard, no authority, just a spectator. For the first time, she wasn't controlling the scene. She was witnessing the consequences of overreach. And I wondered if she finally understood that order without empathy doesn't create peace. It creates resistance. That night ended without incident. No shutdown, no warnings, just applause fading into satisfied exhaustion. The party didn't break rules. It broke assumptions, and that was far more powerful. The morning after the stadium emptied, the noise didn't disappear. It transformed. Instead of music, there were conversations. Posts circulated showing smiling crowds, clean grounds, and comments praising how organized everything had been. City officials publicly thanked the organizers. Vendors shared photos of sold-out food trucks. Performers asked when the next event would be. What Karen tried to frame as chaos had turned into proof that people could gather responsibly without being micromanaged. Back in the neighborhood, the mood shifted. Neighbors who had once avoided HOA meetings suddenly showed up. They asked calm but pointed questions. Why was a backyard party treated like a crisis? Why were warnings issued before conversations? Why did enforcement feel selective? Karen answered with policy language, but the room wasn't buying it anymore. Authority sounds different once people have seen its limits exposed. I stayed quiet through most of it. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to speak. The event spoke for itself. When someone finally asked if I regretted escalating things so far, I answered honestly. I said I regretted that it had to escalate at all. That simple sentence landed harder than any accusation, because it reminded everyone that none of this would have happened if flexibility had existed from the start. Karen's position weakened quickly after that. Committees formed. Review processes were suggested. Terms like transparency and proportional response started appearing in official notes. Control was slowly being replaced with accountability. Not because of anger, but because embarrassment had exposed inefficiency. And nothing motivates reform faster than public proof that a system overreached. A week later, I received an email from Karen. Short, formal, carefully written. She acknowledged that the situation had developed beyond expectations and suggested a conversation about revising community guidelines. It wasn't an apology, but it was an invitation to step back from the edge. I agreed to meet, not for victory, but for closure. Because the goal was never humiliation. It was balance. We met in a neutral space. No clipboard, no audience. Just two people who had experienced the same event from opposite sides. I explained that people don't resist rules. They resist being dismissed. She listened more than she spoke. That alone was new. When we left, nothing dramatic happened. No handshake moment, no redemption arc. But something important shifted. Understanding replaced assumption. The stadium lights were off now. The field was empty again. But the impact lingered. The party ended. The message didn't. And sometimes that's how real change starts. Not with rebellion, but with someone refusing to shrink when told they should. In the weeks that followed, life in the neighborhood didn't snap back to how it was before. It softened. Rules still existed, but they were applied with conversation first, not threats. Warnings became discussions. Complaints turned into compromises. People smiled more at meetings. Attendance stayed high. Once you show people their voices matter, they don't forget how it felt to use them. Karen remained on the board for a while longer, but her approach changed. She longer led with enforcement. She asked questions. She listened. Sometimes she paused before speaking, like someone relearning how power is supposed to work. I won't pretend she became a hero, but she stopped being a villain. And in real life, that's often the best outcome you get. As for the party, it became legend. New neighbors heard about it before they learned where the trash bins went. Someone jokingly suggested making it an annual event. Another asked if the stadium would rent to us again. I smiled and said maybe, not because I needed to prove anything, but because the option now existed. Possibility has a way of changing how people behave, even when it's never used again. One afternoon, I walked through my backyard, the same space where this all began. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly what it was supposed to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. The problem had never been the noise. It had been the fear of losing control over it. Once that fear was challenged, everything else fell into place. I received messages from people outside the neighborhood, too. Different cities, different HOAs. Same story. They weren't asking how to rent stadiums. They were asking how to stand their ground without becoming what they were fighting. I told them the truth. You don't escalate to destroy. You escalate to reveal. You show the absurdity of rigid power by staying calm, legal, and visible. Looking back, I don't think Karen ever expected her complaint to ripple that far. Most control relies on silence and compliance. The moment someone responds with creativity instead of fear, the system has to adapt or collapse. Ours adapted. And that's the rare ending people don't talk about enough. The party ended. The music stopped. The stadium went dark. But the lesson stayed lit. Rules should protect communities, not dominate them. Authority should serve people, not shrink them. And sometimes, the loudest statement you can make is proving you didn't need to be loud at all. Just unmovable. That. How a canceled backyard party turned into something much bigger than a celebration. It became a reminder that freedom doesn't disappear when challenged. It just waits for someone willing to defend it intelligently. Enjoyed how this backyard party turned into a full-blown stadium event. Stick around by subscribing for more real HOA stories, where rules get tested and creativity wins. If this one made you smile or think, give it a like and drop a comment below. Do you think HOAs go too far sometimes, or was Karen just doing her job?